We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
Looks like the rain has gone.
Hey everybody, it's Boysen Hodgson. Welcome back to the Mankind podcast where we're setting out to prove that there is indeed more than one way to be a man, bringing you all kinds of leading thinkers, experts, coaches, writers, actors, activists, everything. And I am super pleased. This is my first conversation with this guest, not the first time on the podcast, however. I'm with Stuart Motola today. Stuart, say hey.
Hey, Boysen. Hey, everybody. It's nice to be here.
So Stuart's been on the podcast before. Stuart is a men's relationship coach who offers guys concrete strategies for how to get unstuck in relationships in life. He's got over 15 years working with thousands of men on the relationships and personal growth, utilizing a unique system that breaks the patterns that keep men tied up in frustrating relationships. Unlike many therapists and couples counselors who can frustrate guys with excessive talking, well, I'm going to have to drag him out to talk today. That's interesting. Stuart focuses on explicit action. We love doing stuff shoulder to shoulder. His unique process offers each man a clear and direct roadmap of progress to create lasting positive results. Stuart, welcome. I'm psyched to have you back on the podcast today and in a different kind of conversation than we've done before. And first of all, let's orient ourselves. Where are you at?
I'm in Asheville, North Carolina. I've been here about 18 months, explicitly a town called Swannanoa. We sometimes joke and call it Swanna Nowhere, which I kind of like. But it's not really nowhere. It's about 20 minutes outside Asheville. But I was in Boulder, Colorado for 25 years. And it's just been a great transition, new life, new curiosities, just a new place. And there's a super strong MKP community here, which is awesome. So I want to give a shout out to my local Asheville MKP brothers who might be listening to this. It's been an honor to be a part of that community and step into some leadership roles there as well.
Yes, Asheville is definitely one of the hot places for MKP these days. Yes, so we share that in common, long history with MKP and being connected in men's groups. So you reached back out to us, or we reached back out to you to say, hey, Stuart, what's going on? You want to come back on? And the thing we got was really interesting. So what are you seeing out there, and where do we want to go in this conversation?
Yeah, well, first off, again, thanks for having me here, Boysen. It's great to connect with you. Last time I was talking with Brandon, and I love talking with him as well. I had come to talk to you about navigating transitions, life change, whether that's a loss of a job. A lot of people are wanting to do more purposeful work in their lives. I talk to a lot of guys who want to become coaches, who want to leave the corporate, rat race. And a lot of my work is specifically focused on men in long-term marriages, helping them understand that, they want to leave the marriage, but they don't want to leave their partner often. So in that case, we talk about renegotiating a new marriage, Wow. So that's another huge transition point in which I work in, as well as, identity. I'm talking to more and more people in executive leadership who are, I'll just be straight up, trying to get their balls, and speak up to their board and not feel like they're at the mercy of their board of directors, and that they're sensitive to the needs of others, but also speaking how they feel like they can be most effective. So there's so many ways in which in our lives transition is huge. how we step into alignment and in integrity with how we want to show up in the world. And that's what I'm working in a lot these days.
Cool. And yes, I can get some of those pieces, and it's real easy. So we'll try to have a subtle conversation about the difference between dominating and boundaries, and the difference between speaking your truth and trying to, like, there's subtlety in here, right? So
Yeah.
for guys who are connected to transition, or anybody who's connected to transition, what are some of the patterns that you see people who are struggling with transitions fall into? What are some of the things that are happening?
In a simple phrase,
Yeah.
that's very loaded, but fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
I know I want something different, but I'm afraid of leaving what I have. That classic, like, I'm comfortable with the misery I know as opposed to the dream I don't know, but yet it's still pulling me forward. And how do I go to that unknown place? How do I leave those things that have me safe and secure? Hey, my marriage sucks, but I love coming home to somebody every night. My job sucks, but, it pays the bills. And, so if I start chiseling away at some of those things I don't want in my life, what might I lose? What's the risk? What's the cost? What's the benefit? All these things are ways in which I work with individuals to help them assess risk. And how can you take those next steps forward while also honoring the gifts of what you've created? I often like to say, you don't just hop in the bus to Guatemala and just dump your old life. You've worked really hard to create gifts, whether that's in a marriage or a friendship or a relationship or at an old job. How can you honor those gifts and yet reconfigure what you're doing in the world or how you are in your relationship?
This might be a tough question, and I'd be curious if you've got stories, but how do you help folks find the line in what they're experiencing, right? Like, there are lots of us out here who think, yeah, my job sucks kind of thing. But there's a line. It's like, when do I know that it's time to do this, that it's time to change my attitude toward it, or realign my mission, or set clearer boundaries, or and maybe it's time to leave completely?
One word: suffering.
Suffering. So talk to me about
Have you
suffering.
suffered enough? Have you suffered enough? Has it reached an intolerable breaking point where you're just like, this stuff needs to change. I can't do this anymore this way. And that's a breaking point. And everybody's got their, own unique place where they reach that. But that's the place where I'm typically seeing people. And I want to be clear, it's not a place of desperation for a lot of people. For a lot of people, it's just clarity. Like, things need to change. I got to change the way I'm showing up in my relationship, or I got to change, my work situation and whatever that is. And there's some clarity that they're only getting so far on their own. And they want somebody to help them, guide them to see what they can't see. And so I wrote a book called Fixing You Is Killing Me, which has a lot of themes about how to navigate life transitions. And one of the pieces I talk about is taking the leap. Taking the leap, again, doesn't mean tossing everything that you've built up in your life, but it means taking the leap towards whatever is calling you forward. And often in those matters, we have to make that distinction and have the discernment between what our ego wants and what our soul is asking of us.
Ooh, how do I do that? That's great. What my ego wants and what my soul discerns. That's great.
Yeah. So a simple question that I like to ask, and I typically, if we were doing some coaching right now, Boysen, I'd have you take a few deep breaths. I'd say, get out of your head, get into your heart, your gut, and your balls as well. And in that space below the neck, when you're not in your head, to just consider this question. And if it resonates, run with it. And if it doesn't, we do some coaching so I can help drop you into the question. It's just, what is your soul asking of you?
Yeah. What is my soul asking of me? That's great. That's great. What comes up? Yeah, the more expression, more fullness, more clarity, more saying what I want, more what is my soul asking of me? More open time. Cool. So that, and how do I know if I am just right? So this has never ever happened to me, of course, but
You're talking about somebody else.
People I know can convince themselves of all kinds of stuff to avoid actually doing work on themselves.
Yeah.
So are there any insights into that, right? Like I feel fed up, I feel pissed off, I feel frustrated and da 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 da. When I actually do the work about it, it's like, oh, there I am again. There I am in the mirror. There's my choices that set me up for this, instead of like, fuck it, I'm walking away from the whole thing.
So what you're speaking to is a zone of reactivity, a zone where an individual's feeling like they're at the mercy of their life. They don't feel like they're in creator consciousness. They feel like they're in victim consciousness at some level. So just even the introduction of those concepts can often help a man get into deeper discernment. And another question that I often ask a guy is like, when you're in that space, how old are you? How old do you feel in that moment? Is there a younger part of you that's surfing up, that's activated, triggered, hooked? And I see this a lot in my coaching, with a good majority of the men that I work with, specifically in the relationship realm. When we're activated, hooked, triggered by our partner, we're typically 8, 10, 12, 14 years old. There's just this younger part of us that experienced that abandonment way back when, or this younger part that didn't have a voice, that has an invisibility wound. So to be able to have that discernment that, oh yeah, I'm not in my 54-year-old self in that moment. How do I have a relationship with that younger part of me? Because until I have that discernment and individuation, I'm actually handing over this 8 or 10 or 12-year-old to my partner and saying, make sure he's okay. Instead of me taking care of that. And one of the hugest things that I teach is taking responsibility for your own emotional safety. And you can't do that when you're in a zone of reactivity and blaming the world for all the shit that's happening to you. You've now handed over your greatest, what I would call your sacred gift of how powerful you are as a human being when you take responsibility for your own emotional safety, for your own life, your own destiny. And so one sentence that I say to all my clients, probably at least several times over the course of a coaching engagement, is until we make the unconscious conscious, it will run our lives and we will call it fate. And many of your listeners may know Carl Jung said that at one time. So we're trying to work with the unconscious forces to make them conscious. And part of that is that endeavor of you taking responsibility for your own well-being, emotional safety, in the course of your life, because we are so powerful when we know that we can change how we are within ourselves and how we experience the world, instead of expecting others to change and fit into the box of how we think things should be.
Brilliant. Excellent. I'm reminded, it's not not very long ago, I'm married 18 years. And in work that I've been doing just in the last 6 months, right? I came back to my wife after doing some work in my men's group. We're going to talk about that, and doing some work with a therapist, and just like fully owned with my wife, like, hey, sometimes I get into this place of like learned helplessness where I will start setting you up to rescue me from whatever is going on in our relationship. Like, I will start playing this role, and that role is exactly that. I'm 11 years old. And a big shift in our relationship was me saying, when you start noticing me manipulating you with that, call me out. Because it's like, I'm done letting that little 11-year-old manipulator, who comes in, oh, poor, this, like a poor me. Oh, I couldn't help. I couldn't take it. It's like, nope, bullshit. Grow up. Hey, 52-year-old, time to be back in the driver's seat. That's been revolutionary for me to recognize when that little boy was running the show.
So since many listeners may be familiar with the archetypes, I hear in that process, you're accessing the ordering function of your king. Yeah. So you're letting that younger part know, you can't run the life of a 52-year-old, and you need to sit in row 5, enjoy the popcorn, and chill out.
Yeah. And outing myself in that, like the going from recognition of my own stuff, recognition of my own baggage, and then getting buy-in, outing myself, right? Telling on myself is another thing we talk about in Circle a lot, right? I'm going to tell on myself, tell the truth about what's going on with me, so that now I've got.
I'm curious, like, in the way I heard you say it, let me know if I got this right, was that you tell your wife, like, call me out. Is there a way too, though, in which you can call yourself out and just work with that part on your own?
Yes, totally. And when I don't, right? Like that's the goal, is that I'm self-aware enough of when these things are going on, and what that looks like for my wife. Gratefully, thankfully, thank goodness, right? I did the New Warrior Training Adventure in April of 2004. My wife did a shadow work weekend called Women in Power in June of 2004, before we got married. So the idea of shadow work together and shadow play and shadow dancing has been like foundational in our relationship. So like, what does calling me out look like? It's like, oh, hey, I see you. Hey, little guy. And it's like, fuck. I tried to get away with it there, didn't I? Yep. Welcome back.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, in life transitions, we get scared. There's that unknown, and those younger parts can get really activated. And so if we can notice who's actually driving the bus in that moment, then we can get some discernment on what inner forces are keeping us stuck and held back, and what inner forces are helping us to, order things properly within ourselves, so that our internal order now can help us to move forward, to move into things that might be scary or unknown. And when we last spoke, Boysen, we did an actual fear practice, because fear is, that one that gets in the way. And I will do practices with men to help them navigate and work with their fear, so that they can transform it from a master, which is what it is when it's unconscious and it's pulling our strings, to an advisor, which is what it can be when it's actually conscious and we're aware of what it's trying to tell us. And so the simple question that I offered you when we last spoke, and that I offer clients, is take a moment and ask fear if it's trying to keep you safe from something. And it's pretty much 99.9% of the time, people resonate with, oh yeah, fear is trying to keep me safe from blank. And then they can actually individuate from their fear instead of be, merged with it.
Yeah.
So that difference of I am feeling fear versus I am fear. And that shows up a lot when people are in life transitions with work, relationship, etc.
Being run by the fear rather than being able to separate myself from the fear and just see it as, oh, hey, data. Look at that. There's fear.
And have it work for you. And actually, a lot of times in that case, I could say to fear, if I'm facing a life transition, it says just, be careful, don't blow stuff up. I want to make sure that, you're treating this other person properly. And I'll say, awesome, fear, that's really good information. So now instead of me being terrified of making that change because I'm going to hurt that other person, I can go forward and say, actually, I'm going to be really sensitive to that other person, but I'm not going to be responsible for how they receive it, knowing that I've delivered whatever communication I'm delivering in a relational and mature manner.
There's some good words. So relational and mature manner, what does that sound like? What can that look like best case scenario?
I mean, in a simple nutshell, I have what's called us consciousness instead of just me consciousness. And so I can understand the distinction between what's transactional, which is a mindset of, well, what am I going to get? How am I going to get what I want? To relational consciousness, which is I have something I need to tell someone, something I need to speak. And I want to be sensitive to the impact it has on them, knowing that that's not mine to own or take responsibility for, but I want to honor the relationship and know that, and be curious, so even if a partner were to come at you and say, who do you think you are? You're always talking. I can say, pause, wait a minute, is there something that you need here? So I'm curious, I'm asking questions. I see you're upset. Now it takes strength to be able to stand in the line of fire with somebody and say, pause, hold on a second, I'm interested in what you have to say, but how you're saying it right now is actually alienating me. And, in the case of a marital relationship or primary relationship, I love you. I want to honor you, but I can't if you're yelling at me. And so can we take 5 minutes and, oh, screw you. You're not walking out of the room again. Sweetie, let's take 5 minutes. Okay. Et cetera, et cetera. So that's boundary making as well. Yeah. But what I'm alluding to primarily is, as I said, prior, is that fear can actually be an advisor and say, yeah, be really, be kind as you deliver, as you speak whatever you need to speak, as opposed to stopping you from moving forward to whatever needs to be communicated. I often like to say that, I lead men in this 4-quadrant breathwork practice, head, heart, gut, balls, and each quadrant has information for us. And I believe that self-unity is the key to a good life. We often are in the pursuit of happiness, and happiness is like this nebulous thing. It comes, it goes, it comes and goes. We'd be BSing ourselves if we thought we could always be happy. It's not life. That's not reality. That's a Viagra commercial. But when we're self-unified, head, heart, gut, balls, we're aligned. We know that we've been in touch with those emotions, needs, wants, all of which can go unconscious. Because maybe as a kid, I had no voice. My parents just shut that down. So now I bring that forward into the boardroom, into the bedroom, whatever it is. But when I have a safe space to access those voices, those wants and needs, I can get aligned now. And when I'm acting in my life, internally and externally aligned, happiness comes a lot more often. And as I like to say, breathe, connect with your happiness, exhale, release it, because it may not stay around very long. Don't get too attached to your happiness, but stay vigilant and disciplined with a practice of self-unity and alignment and self-integrity.
That's awesome. Talk more about breath. So we do talk about this some, but we don't talk about it a whole lot on the podcast. What does our breath have to teach us?
Can we curse on this
Fuck
podcast?
Yes.
Slow the fuck down. That's the biggest thing our breath is teaching us. Because if we can't pause, if we can't create a space for us to process what's happening to us, it goes unconscious and then runs our lives. So breath allows us to slow down. It also allows us to get out of our heads, which we know the head's a great tactician and strategist, but it's not the best visionary to run our lives. That comes from more of that gut, that knowing, that king quadrant, that sense of intuition. And so to get out of our heads, we can breathe into our body and access the intelligence of the body. And, in like Asian Indian mythology, they're going to talk about chakras.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to talk a more Western slant: heart, gut, for men, balls, whatever, sex organ. That's the intelligence of the body. Sometimes you can get into the intelligence of the legs or the feet or whatever that is, that grounding, etc. But how can we access these other three quadrants? Sometimes I'll say a guy runs on 1.5 out of 4 cylinders, like a car metaphor. So the one is the head and the half cylinder is the cock, because he's only using half of it, knowing that there's an energy there, and he's only using it towards sexuality as opposed to where he wants to penetrate the world, where he wants to leave his mark. Because often I find that for a lot of guys, sex is about aliveness, vivacity. We feel really alive when we're in that act of connecting and lovemaking. But there's also, how do we bring that energy of, like I said, to penetrate the world? Where do we want to leave our mark? What kind of father do we want to be? What kind of partner do we want to be? What kind of leader do we want to be? That can come from that lower region. And often I associate it with the warrior,
right.
That doer, that one who gets shit done, who feels like motivated, inspired, etc. And a lot of times I'll associate the gut with the king, that knowing, that intuition, that higher seeing or higher feeling into, however that looks. And in the mind, we'll talk about seeing things clearly instead of what the mind's naturally so good at, which is self-criticism.
Nice. Yeah, I'm glad that you went into kind of defining around balls, or that center of being, that energetic. In some martial arts, it's the hara, right? It's that point right above right on top of the pubis, where it's like that center of motion, that low center of gravity that can move us forward and connect. Right.
Yeah.
But just, as somebody with those instruments, yeah, my balls have let me know a lot of things about fear, and about activation, and about fecundity, right? But like bigness, right? All of that kind of stuff. Thank you for that. So
sure.
There's
absolutely.
Before we go in, we're going to talk about a handful of like specific tools and things like that. And I also want to do a so what question before we get there. So what? How can we navigate transition? We learn some things by working with you, working with a coach through these things, so that our lives look like what? So somebody that you've helped come through transition, somebody that has been mastering this unity within the body, somebody who's been utilizing their fear as an ally through these things. What does that give a man? What does that give a person coming out the other side of a transition?
What's your thought? I feel like you know the answer.
Well, it came out in our conversation, right? Bigger and wiser
Sure.
were the words that came out of you.
Yeah. Bigger, wiser, more capable, not having to run around the world wearing a mask. Part Parker Palmer is a Quaker, an author, teacher. He talks about a hidden wholeness. He's got a book called A Hidden Wholeness. And the damage we do to ourselves and to others when we're not living in our wholeness, when we're not living in full authenticity and alignment and integrity. We are fragmented. And fragmentation, inner fragmentation, is a miserable experience. And at worst, it leads to suicide. And at second worst, it leads to abuse, domestic abuse, violence, an inability to hold ferocity and tenderness at the same time, an inability to model a version of manhood that is generative. Because, all this anti-patriarchy talk is, I support it. But if there's nothing to fill the space of that, and you're destroying, masculinity altogether, you've created a huge void, and that's very dangerous because you haven't now brought a model for men to step into otherwise. And so I believe that generative manhood is something that I would speak about. Erik Erikson, the psychologist years ago, had spoken about that. And when you're living that, you feel vital, alive. You're cultivating relationships that serve you. You're raising children who are asking themselves the hard questions that you're asking yourself. I love it. I had a client, he was teaching his 13-year-old how to listen to his fear based on our practice. I mean, imagine, the if we could be teaching our young people some of these things. We especially in the West, we're wizards at technological development, but we're so impoverished when it comes to human development. And our external world is showing the results of that.
Disconnected, out of unity.
Exactly. And so at the end of the day, your question was, so what? Being the master of your life force.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
Kind of a Jedi.
A Jedi, yes.
At some level.
So talk about some strategies that you work with men to develop, and possibly some stuff that came out of navigating out of your book, Fixing You Is Killing Me.
Sure. I think I'll reference my personal story a little bit just to make it more personal for the listeners. I was married for 20 years. And I had a son when I was 30. I wasn't fully ready to be a father, so a lot came at me really fast. And I had learned from my family of origin to basically go invisible. My parents were working a lot. Had a very confrontational relationship with an older brother. So as the younger guy, I was taking a lot of hits. And, bless my parents, they did the best they could, but they were not effectively managing the situation. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to disturb them. They're busy working parents. And so I just went invisible with my needs. I repeated that in what Gillette and Moore and The King Within, which was a book they dedicated to just the king archetype. They talk about repetition compulsion, on how we will repeat the dynamics of younger years when we didn't have defensible psychological boundaries. We will repeat those later on in life precisely to do that replay to get free of them. So I did that replay with my wife, where I put my needs second. She had a lot of chronic health issues. So perfect person for a guy who puts his needs in shadow to be in relationship with, somebody who has a lot of needs. And over time, as I saw the damage that was doing to me, and my first introduction to men's work was through the Men's Leadership Alliance out of Boulder, Colorado. And I had actually done work with them as a participant and then a senior leader in the community for a good 12 years before I even came to MKP. At that time, I kind of joke, I was kind of doing some anthropology, see what the big guy in men's work was doing. And I had a great experience, and I sat in I groups for many years. But anyway, through men's work, I got a healthy version of masculinity and how, starting to claim and reclaim my needs was the key to living in integrity with myself and, being the man I needed to be for myself, for my family. And so I had that journey. And it became clear that the contract of my marriage, of my relationship, was no longer serving me. So I moved towards trying to reconfigure that relationship. And it became clear to me, and I've said in the past that one of the hardest things I ever did was leave the woman I loved. I still loved my wife greatly, even as I was initiating divorce, knowing that the structure of marriage in that relationship I didn't see a feasible path forward for who I was now growing into. And I navigated it in a very gentle, caring, loving way. There was a point at which she asked me to not initiate the legal divorce papers because she was still emotionally catching up with it. And I said, sure. But I was clear too that I was needing to see other women and move on with my life. And we actually, for a good 18 months, met once a week. I think it was Wednesdays. We would do like a 40-minute check-in while we're going through this really just grieving, challenging time. And we would just speak from the heart. She'd speak for 10, 15 minutes. My job was just to repeat, reflect back what I heard, not argue. And then she would do the same for me. And then we were kind of lighter after that meeting. And then we'd go have dinner with my son, who was about 15, 16 at the time, in the house. And there were just these really surreal moments where we're both in deep grief, but we're laughing and having a good time with our son over dinner. So it was this like powerful commitment to the family and to him. And I think we did an amazing job of showing him that two people could still love each other while reconfiguring the contract of their relationship. We divorced for $200. We've remained friends to this day, and we still manage a very successful family business that we had at the time. That's just, that's when I talk about honoring the gifts that you've created. Mm-hmm. I wanted, we had two babies. One was the son and one was this business. So we've both, massively seen the benefits of that business as well. And we showed our son that two people can still love each other. And actually last June, I was out there for his college graduation. He's 24. And, we just had such a sweet, beautiful time together. And there was a lot of love and kindness shared. And I will say, it ain't easy to do, man.
Wow. Yeah.
It ain't easy. It's a gauntlet of its own. But having gone through that journey myself and, I would say pioneered it because I wasn't consulting conscious uncoupling books at the time. I don't even know if they existed back in 2014. But we were both committed. And I think I said to her at one point, I want to divorce you with the same love that I married you with. And she, she's a soulful woman and she understood that.
That's powerful. And damn, not what I witnessed growing up. I'll just say that. Not what I witnessed in my parents' divorce. And yeah. Do you think that, so as you said, you were pioneering, you weren't reading conscious uncoupling books at the time. Do you think that there's more awareness in the culture these days of how to do this a little better than we have in the past?
I do think it is. And I think people are hungry. And right now in my work, I don't work a ton in the divorce or uncoupling realm. I tend to work more on the guys who want to save their marriages. Just to be clear with listeners about that. But I do think people look at it and like, really, am I going to hand this over to the lawyers who are just going to bill me hourly and, it's a twisted system.
Yes.
Lawyers are benefiting from conflict.
Yes.
And I just want to be straight up. Not all lawyers are taking advantage of that, but many are. Or they're just assuming that's the way it's got to be done. And what average divorce costs 40, 80 grand. I mean, I have clients who've spent $1 million on a divorce.
Ouch. Yeah. Benefiting from pain and benefiting from hurting others. That's tough. That's tough.
So, but just taking it back to the concept of life transitions, whether that's a relationship, a job, death of a loved one, the loss of an old identity. Let's say you're in a certain role and now soul is calling forth. So how do we have our role align with our soul so that we don't experience fragmentation every day? A lot of people wonder, like, I just don't know why I can't just suck it up and just do my job every day. I have a great job. I get paid well. But then there's this inner fragmentation and the soul's knocking on the door and saying, you are dying here. And the one thing I've learned about soul work is the soul, it has no regard for your bank account. It's irrelevant to that part of you. And that's very confronting because we also have to navigate, the material world, our finances. So how do we walk what Joseph Campbell called the fine, thin path? And Robert A. Johnson, a Jungian analyst, talked about in this modern world, our role is to be in the mythical and the practical. And I feel like I've done a really good job of that personally with a lot of hard work, like the mythical and the practical.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really good. Where do I want to go from here? Can we talk about in the realm of transitions, right? So I'm not alone in any transition that I make, whether, job transitions, relationship transitions, any of those kind of things, even experiencing loss, right? Even the experience of grief. Talk about relationship and trust. Because there's so many, like all of the threads of trust that exist between me and everyone else that I'm in relationship with. How do you think about trust in relationships? Or you were also talking about most of the men that you work with are wanting to keep their relationships and wanting to save their relationships.
When you say trust, that word comes up a lot. It often comes up, believe it or not, when it comes to sex, because men sometimes miss the fact that, again, in a heterosexual relationship, for women, typically, and some women are different, but typically they have to feel like they trust their man, that he's trustworthy, that he's solid, that he's there for her to open sexually. Whereas often guys can, compartmentalize that and, hey, I want to connect. I want to have sex, he doesn't need that. So there's often an education point for a guy to notice how he's actually making his partner feel unsafe if he takes her on as if he becomes a pleaser to her, that's not safe to her. And if he becomes a fixer, she feels like a project, that's not safe to her. So explicitly, how can he stand strong with, complaints, criticisms, whatever's coming at him, holding boundaries, but yet also holding receptivity. And that can help build trust, explicitly in a relationship. So I notice time and again that when guys enter pleaser, fixer, rescuer, atlas man, obviously rager, and often a pleaser, when he's at his wit's end, he becomes a rager. And these are masks. Again, I know in the project we talk about masks sometimes. So I'm going to wear the pleaser mask because underneath that is this unconscious force of a little boy who's scared of conflict because he grew up in a home where conflict wasn't navigated well. And there's no model to understand that if you actually navigate conflict well. And hopefully some people have had the experience of this out there. you get to that other side and you're like, oh, we feel so much closer now. We work through that thing together. So that's that scenario where how can we use conflict to build even more trust and to build our resilience? But at the end of the day, neither of us can do that if we're in hijacked, activated, younger parts of ourselves. So there's a level of self-responsibility to even trust yourself.
Yes.
To enter the room into conflict. Do you trust yourself, or do you just, I screwed up again. I said the wrong thing, or I yelled at my partner, Oh, well, yeah, that doesn't help you build trust with yourself. And that's where all of my clients have part of my work is like, that's one of the ways I distinguish myself from therapy. Like, you have 2 hours per week of work, sometimes more, that you have to do in order to get, true results from this work that we're doing. And 1 hour of that is a daily practice, 15 minutes a day, 4 to 5 days a week, learning to build self-unity and trust with yourself in a safe space. Because you got to practice in the safe space, because then when you're in the fire of conflict, you got a much better chance of not falling off the horse.
That was exactly it. That was the thread, was self-trust. And I couldn't even come up with it as I was framing the question, but there it is, right? Whatever transition I'm entering into grief, I don't trust myself to not get lost. And I have to build the internal unity to do that. I'm entering into a shift in a work role or something, right? It's, again, building the unity inside so that I can trust myself to handle whatever the next conflict that's going to come out of this.
Yeah. And one of the great ways to build trust with yourself is to assess risk and listen to that inner risk manager, which is the part of us that's constantly, steps into a room and is constantly assessing risk. Like, oh, well, if I talk to that person, they're going to take me to the rabbit hole of their problems, because that's what they always do. Well, if I talk to that person, they're going to actually ask me a few questions about myself. We're going to have a mutual exchange. So even in social situations, I'm assessing risk. So if I look at a job situation, I'm assessing risk. So what I would typically encourage somebody is, let's assess the risks that are palatable for you to take now to move forward, that don't completely blow your nervous system out of the water.
Nice. Yeah.
So you want to change jobs? Well, great. Schedule a call with somebody who does something in your field right now. You don't need to quit your job. Start putting in 5 hours a week. You want to change your marriage? Great. We'll start learning how to put up your energetic Star Trek shield so that when your partner comes at you with that torrent of things that she comes at you with, you have at least 2 inches of a boundary to actually pause it so it doesn't blow you out. And then you can assess, okay, I can talk to you about this. I can't talk to you about this right now, but I make a commitment to remember that, and we'll revisit that another time, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So how can you make it safe for you to take risks, even tiny risks up front? Increase your risk tolerance,
yes.
Increase your resilience. Yes. And as you keep doing it, and you hear really high profile people, like in Tribe of Mentors, it's a Tim Ferriss book. It's a big fat book with a ton of interviews with successful people, and they talk about, like, I learned to say no to 10,000 interviews. And, over time that muscle got developed. So I also hear a lot of times, I learned to start saying yes to things that scare me more and more and more. And I built a bigger tolerance for that kind of stuff. So how do you take those first baby risk steps and know that you're moving forward? And then with that is to, trust the process. Yes. Some patience. There's that party that wants it done yesterday.
Yes. So, we've covered a lot of great things, right? So turning fear into an advisor, creating inner unity. There's an idea of kind of habit. You haven't used the word habit, but building new habits, right? 15-minute practice 4 times a week. And that's the habit formation thing about how you align. Yeah. Welcoming in new stuff and checking it out with your risk manager, assessing risks in a situation. So, and the last thing, as we kind of get toward the end here, you've hit it multiple times around how you found, through community, through men's work, through connections, through other things, that we don't do this alone. We don't do this work alone. So talk more about that.
I heard it said once that nobody can do the work for you, but you can't do it alone. And I love that statement. And as you were talking, it made me think to a passage in my book, and I'm referring to my book because I'm super proud of it. It was a 350-page mess, and with a kick-ass editor, James Church is out of Netherlands, Colorado. He helped me get it down to 120 pages, super tight. I'm a lifelong writer. But anyway, one of the passages that came to mind when you were speaking is, Joseph Campbell talked about the dark forest. So a lot of the men out there are familiar with the 3 stages of the hero's journey: the departure, the descent, and the return. So the descent is that place where you're just blown out of the water. You don't know what's up, what's down. So Campbell talked about you navigate the dark forest much more efficiently. You don't avoid it, but you navigate it more efficiently with the help of allies and mentors. And a huge light bulb has gone off for people when I've talked about the difference between allies and friends. Some of us have friends who are allies, and some of us have friends who are not allies. And the key distinction is the friends who are allies we're willing to trust their counsel, and that their counsel is seeing us instead of them projecting their shadows onto us. And a true ally is not afraid of losing your friendship, because they know that the higher mechanism or force that brings you together is love, respect, and truth. And those are the principles that honor that relationship, to be allies, to be generative forces for each other, even if that might mean risking losing the relationship.
Love, respect, and truth. Beautiful.
So the allies, and then the mentors part is, at the end of the day, a mentor could also be spoken to as an elder. We have many elders in our culture, but not a lot of elders. And the elder or the mentor is one who's been through the dark forest and come out bigger and stronger and wiser.
Nice. Thank you.
And they can offer that to you. So that's that part of not going it alone.
Really good. So coming back around, how should listeners get in touch with you? And look for the link to the book in the show notes here, and link to website in the show notes. But how do you want folks to connect to you?
Sure. The most simple is my website, stuartmotola.com, StuartMotola.com. Most of the content there is explicitly about relationship, but I am working with leaders, executive leaders, more and more on how to prioritize and order their lives. You can also check me out on YouTube. I got about 175 videos on YouTube, like 4 to 5 minute snippets that I offer concrete tools in each video. And I'm about to release a guide called A Man's Guide to a Kick-Ass Marriage that's coming out in the next week or two. And that'll be available on my website. And that's a freebie. It's like a PDF people can download. And it talks a lot about one concept is your she esteem greater than your self-esteem? Do you internalize how your partner values you over how you value yourself? And if you do, no bueno. You got to change that. So those are a few ways, though.
That's going to be when this episode comes out. Your listeners, go to stuartmotola.com to get that. It'll be out by the time this episode is released. So that sounds cool. I look forward to reading it.
Awesome. Yeah. And I put a ton of work into it. I'm proud of it. It went through 60 revisions, and it's just a short piece of content.
Nice. Stuart Motola, thank you for hanging out with me for a while and talking about navigating transitions. I got some good tidbits out of this today. Thank you.
Right on. I appreciate it. Grateful to you for the opportunity to chat and thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, Boysen. So thanks again.
Thank you.
This has been the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. And I personally want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. Now, the fee for this episode is simple. If you found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, remember that life doesn't happen to us. It happens for us, so long as we rip the pen out of fate's hand and become the author of our own story. So my friend, pick up the pen and we'll see you next week. Lots of love.